Good evening, everyone. This is what is it? Eighth episode of the Mundane Life of a Gay. Can't believe it's the eighth episode. I know it's been a long time since I've done one of these videos, but I've been kind of busy and I figured I would do a video updating everyone on life and then talking about the actual subject that I would like to discuss. I've been having a lot of difficulty with creativity lately with regard to YouTube, which is why I haven't been doing as many live streams. I actually find it a lot easier doing just take videos instead of just sitting here live in front of people. But I'm getting more used to it, and I know that in order to become more comfortable with them, I just have to start doing it more. So, does it really? I mean, I guess I'll just have to get over it, right? Um, but I'm really excited about things that will be happening on my YouTube in the near future. I am actually planning on a few collaborations with some other YouTubers, and I'm really trying to regularly do videos on a weekly basis. It's hard to pen down a specific day to do videos because my schedule is pretty sporadic, and when the school year happens and I'm teaching, it's really difficult making the time to, uh, do videos while I'm, grading and lesson planning and all of that jazz. It gets a little bit hectic sometimes, but I'll figure something out. I'm sure I will. You guys are usually very patient with me, and when it comes to doing my videos, and I really appreciate it. So that's really cool. Oh yeah, my new Pokemon shirt. Do you like it? I've been obsessing over Pokemon Go lately because not long ago they released Generation 2, and that's kind of like one of my hobbies. It usually gets me out walking and stuff, which I need to do that more, as you can tell. But other than that, I've been doing some writing here and there. I've been working a little bit. Basically, life has been pretty low-key lately. I've been spending a lot of time gardening, which is one of my hobbies, especially over the summer. It gets my mind off things, and it's very distressing. But lately I have been thinking about Pride Month a lot, and that's probably why, as you can gather, many of my videos recently have been themed around Pride, mostly having to do with, well, what should Pride be about? What should Pride do? How, what benefit should it have for the community? And of course, over the past few videos, I've come to the conclusion that not only is it a celebration, but Pride is also a place for education, and education needs to be a part of that celebration. And when I say education, I mean confronting people who may not be familiar with our history, helping people understand that, we have gone through a lot to get where we are, but there's still a lot of things that we have to do. And people tend to forget that there is still a lot that we need to do. There is still a lot of discrimination. There are still rights that we don't have that we need to focus on. And of course, it varies from state to state. We all have the right to marry now, which I think is wonderful, and I think that we should celebrate that. But just because we have the right to marry doesn't necessarily mean we have all the rights that we should have as, well, fellow human beings, fellow Americans. So that's one thing that I think Pride should satisfy. And I have like cat hair in my mouth. The hell? Anyway, sorry about that. It's been a long time since I've been to Pride, unfortunately, because where I live, the nearest Pride celebration is like 50, 60 miles away, and it's not always easy to get there. And I've thought about creating a Pride celebration in my own community, and maybe I'll do that in the future. I don't know, but I have to continually think about where I am when it comes to celebrating Pride, because where I live in West Branch, Michigan, and it's this very small town. It's pretty conservative, and there are many situations where I still do not feel welcome or comfortable here because because it is, I mean, if I go to Walmart, say, with my significant other and we hold hands, it's very possible, and it has happened, where I've actually had people give dirty looks and make comments, and it's unnerving attracting that type of negative attention, even though I've gotten to the point in my life where I'm like, hey, I can deal with it, it's fine, but that's something that people who live in smaller communities like this need to take into consideration. And I think that's why not everyone gets exposure to Pride, because there is a large gay or LGBTQ population who don't live in urban centers, that don't necessarily have the resources they may need. And that's another aspect of education that I think needs to happen in the LGBTQ community. Not everyone has the same privileges and access to Pride like, other people do. And that can be a little bit unnerving, as I'm sure you can imagine. But Rami, I think it's Rami. Hi, Rami. How are you? It's good to see you. If you are watching and you want to post something in the chat box, I am monitoring the chat box, so please feel free to do that. But I think people need to realize that privilege comes in a variety of different levels. Everyone has a different level of privilege. And I'm going to be talking about this when I move into the conversation about racism in the LGBTQ community. But right now, I just want to focus on Pride. I was responding. But I have certain privileges. I have a very solid activist community whom I interact with, and that is a very good support network. But not every LGBTQ person has that luxury, and we need to keep that in mind when we're educating at Pride, because we need people to go out into these communities and to make some sort of difference. And frankly, I could honestly make more of a difference in the community that I live in. It's just, when you're confronted with hate, it's very intimidating. And I think, like I've mentioned in prior videos, a lot of LGBTQ people still have that deep underlying fear that prevents them from voicing themselves as they should. And I mean, it's convenient to do it here on YouTube because I'm just looking at a camera lens. I'm not actively facing people, which that's something that I'd like to do more in the future. I'd like to actually face people and educate more with my activism, like in a more intimate setting, I guess. Does that make sense? So, and in many ways, Pride does satisfy that. Pride does make sure that that happens. But a lot of people get so caught up in the celebration of Pride that they forget that there's still conversations that need to be had, okay? And in my prior videos lately, I have been talking about various conversations that need to be had. Conversations like, and I'm speaking mostly from the experience of being a gay male, of objectification and sexualization in gay male circles, racism in gay male circles, which I'm about to talk about a little bit, the exclusion and marginalization of bisexual, asexual, pansexual, and transgender individuals. Those voices in our community are largely silenced because the majority in the community feel that things should be in a certain way when it comes to gender expression and sexual expression. And we have to realize that that is not acceptable. We have to be accepting of everyone's identities. That's what makes us diverse. That's what makes the LGBTQ plus community the LGBTQ plus community. Okay? And people tend to overlook that. We cannot overlook that because it's ostracizes people. Now, leading into the conversation about racism in the community, a lot of notably white gay men do not like to admit that there is racism that happens in the community because, I mean, with focusing so much on the body itself and the celebration of Pride, like, it's easy to forget about those things. But recently, in my last video, if you watched it, you listened to me talk about how Philadelphia chose to incorporate 2 new colors on their pride flag to represent the representation of minorities, like racial minorities within the community. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge the fact that, you know, racial minorities are often silenced, even in our community, because with the community the way it is, with the momentum that we've achieved, we want to believe that everything is sunshine and rainbows. It isn't always sunshine and rainbows for everyone. So Philadelphia decided to put these colors on the flag. Basically, it just made the rainbow bigger, which in my idea is really awesome. The rainbow is a representation of the color spectrum, and the color spectrum includes all colors, so why shouldn't brown and black be emphasized on if they choose to emphasize on those colors, right? But a lot of people were upset over it because they believed that the rainbow already satisfies that, and that adding those additional colors takes away from the overall battle that we have with regard to our own equality. But truthfully, I feel like when it comes to battling for rights and battling against discrimination, that's something that everyone can relate to who is marginalized, not just LGBTQ people, but people who are of different races, races who are discriminated against. And we shouldn't exclude those people, because those people could potentially be very critical voices for us in our own battle toward, you know, obtaining more rights and, you know, acknowledging atrocities. My roommate Lacey just typed in the chat box, "Hey Lace, I love you." And Imran, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Nice to see you. He's from Birmingham, UK. Awesome. Quite a ways away. That's really cool. I'm glad to see that people are actually chatting on this thing. Very infrequently do people actually type in the chat box, so I'm kind of secretly nerding out about that a bit. So it's just nice to know that people are listening in a live situation. But of course, a lot of gay men were very upset over this because they thought that it took away from the emphasis of the battles that we already fight, and I don't necessarily agree with that at all. In fact, when I first heard about the flag, I'm just going to say it, I was upset too, because I really didn't understand why these colors were added. And when I researched that and understood that Philadelphia just wanted to generate conversation about including minorities, racial minorities within our community, I thought that was a very just reason, and I think that's something that we need to do. Now, in my last video, I didn't have enough time to go into some examples of racial discrimination within the LGBTQ community, but there are many that are there, and mostly a lot of them are sexual stereotypes, unfortunately. And you guys know how I feel about sexual stereotypes. They really anger me to the point of rage quitting. But taking point one, for example, Asian men are often discriminated against amongst gay men because people believe that they have, well, small bits, small penises. And that's a pretty huge stereotype, and it's a very demeaning, horrible stereotype that offends a lot of people. And if you look on dating websites like Grindr, or dating apps like Grindr, which I try to avoid because it's just annoying in every way, you'll notice that in people's requests for what they prefer or their preferences for what they're attracted to, they will put, oh, no Gaysians because of that reason that I mentioned, or no black guys, or no Hispanic guys. And I think that's horrible, in my opinion. You know, I understand that people have different attractions. I understand that people have different preferences when it comes to what they're interested in, but also how you present that is very critical. If you are mentioning it in a condescending way, that could come off as being racism in a way, like subtle racism. Subtle racism can be just as bad as blatant blurting out racism, because when it's subtle, people begin to get used to it. They do it more, and then they end up thinking that it's okay to do it because it's being done in that fashion, and that's not right. And I've noticed that these are just rampant on these on these dating apps and sites. And that's one thing that I want to avoid. That's one thing that I try to steer clear of. And part of that journey in understanding this racism is acknowledging the fact that as a white-skinned male, I have a considerable amount of privilege because I do not have to worry about that type of discrimination. I don't think in my life, to my knowledge, I have ever dealt with any type of racial discrimination. And it's hard to imagine someone having to go through that type of battle, you know, and it's very difficult for LGBTQ racial minorities because, one, they're already fighting the battle of being LGBTQ. But on top of that, they're also battling against the rest of us in the community who may be discriminatory against their skin color. That's two battles. And think about it too, like women who are of racial minorities, who are LGBTQ, they face mind-boggling amounts of discrimination, and they have a huge battle to fight. Transgender people who are of a racial minority who are a part of the LGBTQ community, obviously, they have a huge battle to face. So instead of wanting things to be a specific way and going on and on about our sexual preferences or our body preferences, our skin color preferences when it comes to attractiveness, why don't we stop perpetuating those stereotypes and actually begin embracing everyone? Because we all have to be an ally to one another. How are we going to continue our forward momentum if we don't act as an ally together? You know? But and the discussion about privilege is something that I have had a huge battle with myself, because I think it's important to point out people's privilege in a way that does not undermine their own voice or invalidate them in any way. And it's really hard to do that. And I've made videos before talking about why people shouldn't point out other people's privilege. I've since then changed that stance, and I still stick with that stance. I think it's important to point out privilege because it's important to educate. That's why I pointed out my own privilege. Sorry if you hear anything above. My neighbor is vacuuming. She's always vacuuming. Anyway, I always I have to remind myself of my own privilege in order to adequately place myself in someone else's shoes. Just because we may have privilege, though, I do believe I don't think that means that we don't have the ability to place ourselves in other people's shoes, though. There are some people who think that. I do not think that. I feel that as generally altruistic individuals, humans should have the capacity to place themselves in other people's shoes. So, to that effect, why shouldn't conversations about privilege take place? Why shouldn't we acknowledge those things? Because ultimately, if everyone in the conversation is open-minded about it, there won't be any hurt feelings, and everyone comes to a mutual understanding. I obviously know that it's easier said than done doing that, because sometimes frayed feelings happen. Sometimes people get upset when you point out their privilege because they think that you're discriminating against them by pointing out their privilege. And the only thing that you can do in that type of situation is assure them that, hey, I'm not trying to invalidate you. You know, I respect and support you, but you also need to know my own battle. You also need to know what I've gone through, you know. And I experience this a lot in conversations about, say, sexual assault, or conversations about domestic violence. I mean, I haven't really experienced much domestic violence, but I have been sexually assaulted. And I've had situations before where a person has told me, well, just get over it. Like, you shouldn't have to worry. You shouldn't have to worry. You're a man. You shouldn't have to feel vulnerable because that's not you. That's not what sexual assault is about. And usually people who end up saying that are individuals who have never experienced it themselves. Hence, they have a type of privilege, which in the past I've drawn their attention to that privilege because that's the veil that they wear that prevents them from taking a moment and listening. All right. And I think this is a very careful line that activists need to make sure that they're aware of too. Imran says that I think sympathy and empathy is missing from a lot of people's personalities. I totally agree with that, by the way. But this is a fine line that activists have to tread because many of us have privilege, like the privileges that I have that I told you about. And we need to keep that privilege in mind in order to articulate ourselves correctly. And I know I've mentioned this in the past. There's a video that I made where I talk about being instead of being a social justice warrior, I choose to be a social justice educator. And I say that we need to listen as much as we speak out, because when we're listening, we're acknowledging and validating other people's experiences and stories. And I think that's what everyone needs to do. That's what everyone in the LGBTQ community needs to do for one another. We can't exclude other people's experiences because their experiences are valid. Their traumas are valid. The discrimination that they have faced is as damaging as discrimination that anyone else faces. And we can't pick and choose what discrimination should be discussed. We can't pick and choose whose rights are under more threat than others, because we're all in this battle. We may have different battles. We may have different foes that we face. But does that mean we shouldn't support one another? No, I don't believe that whatsoever. I do believe that we should encourage and support one another. And Pride is a place where that should happen. And it does happen in many instances. But there are many instances where it doesn't happen. And I have a lot of, as much as I love Pride, I have a lot of frustrations with Pride because Pride focuses very much, or at least the media focuses very much on the visual aspect of Pride. When you think of Pride, when you type in Google searches of Pride, you will either see drag queens or you will see men who are wearing Speedos, men who are wearing very revealing outfits, or sometimes even no outfits. And while that celebratory aspect is important, that can't be the focus. That can't be the only thing that people take away from Pride. Okay, that really upsets me, because if I were in fact, I can speak from experience. When I was a teenager and I knew I was gay, but I wasn't out, I looked up Pride stuff back when the internet was very slow and plodding on dial-up. I would look up Pride stuff and I would see all of these chiseled god bodies that, I lost track of the meaning of Pride because I focused on the visual aspect of it. And that led to a lot of self-image issues, body image issues that to this day I still suffer with. So how we present Pride is very important. And of course, I don't think it's just Pride's fault. I do think the media has a lot to blame for it too, because the media chooses to focus on what they think generates the most buzz. And that's a problem. Because I can guarantee you there are gay men out there who look toward Pride celebrations via the internet or via the media, who may not be understanding that it is actually a safe place. Okay. And a lot of people just don't take that into consideration. And I know sometimes other LGBTQ people get upset at me because I'm drawing attention to these difficult things, but how do we grow if we don't draw attention to these difficult things? Our community is far from perfect, and I don't feel shame in admitting that, because nothing is perfect. Striving for perfection is what keeps us growing. It's what keeps us accepting each other. It's what keeps us making some sort of difference for one another in our mutual support. So using that logic, I think it's justified mentioning these things. I think it's okay to do that. But but I really want these conversations to happen more frequently. I think they should happen more frequently. I know at some prides they do happen, and I commend Philadelphia for creating conversation about racial segregation, well, not racial segregation, but racial marginalization within our community, which in some places may manifest itself as some form of segregation. But I'm glad that they are generating that conversation because it needs to happen. Many conversations do. But anyway, I think I'm going to start wrapping things up here. So I'm almost at 30 minutes, and I try to keep these capped at 30 minutes. I wish I could muster enough talking points to talk for an hour or more, because I mean, most people know that when they do get me talking, I am a chatterbox, and I usually will not stop. So, but thank you guys for taking the time to listen to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to like my videos. Thank you for taking the time to share my videos. I really appreciate getting messages from people. Over the past couple of days, I've been getting some amazing messages from people reaching out to me about me voicing concerns about racism in the community because it's not talked about enough. And I really want people to understand that it shouldn't be terrifying to have these types of conversations. And I encourage people who do feel like they're a minority within the LGBTQ community, voice yourself, okay? Because there are privileged people out there who are willing to listen. There are people out there who do acknowledge their privilege enough to be able to embrace and accept other people. Okay. Oh, my roommate. Hey. My roommates like to play surprises on me sometimes, and I love them very dearly for it. I was wondering what that was behind me. I was like, oh, that's a weird decoration. See, they're part of my support network too, because they are a part of the community. And I think, like I was saying earlier, we all need to support one another. We all need to solidify our connections, I guess. But anyway, thank you for taking the time to watch. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. If you feel like this video may be helpful to anyone, feel free to share it. It means a lot to me. And thank you, as always, for encouraging, empowering, and supporting me as well. Okay? You guys have a good night. Bye.